The sun rose over Marlow County, Texas, on the morning of October 14th, 1983, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that stretched across endless farmland. It was a Friday. The kind of morning where the air still held the coolness of night, where dew clung to blades of grass, and where 5 children walked to school like they had done dozens of times before. By noon, all 5 of them had disappeared. No bodies, no witnesses, no explanation. Just gone. Just gone. This is the story of the Marlow Five, a case that haunted a small Texas town for over 40 years, but until a single discovery in 2024 ripped open old wounds and forced investigators to confront a truth so disturbing, so impossible, that it challenged everything they thought they knew about that October morning. And the children were ordinary kids from ordinary families. There was nothing remarkable about them, nothing that would make anyone think they were destined to become the center of one of Texas's most baffling mysteries. But sometimes, horror doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just takes. Let's start with the victims. 11-year-old Danny Whitmore was the oldest of the group. He had sandy blonde hair that his mother, Patricia, trimmed every month with kitchen scissors on the back porch. Danny loved baseball cards, collected them obsessively, kept them in a shoebox under his bed. He was protective of his younger sister, vigilant in a way that made his parents proud. He was the kind of kid who held doors open for elderly neighbors and mowed lawns for $5 a pop during summer break. His sister, 9-year-old Emma Whitmore, was quieter than her brother. She preferred books to people, often retreating to the corner of the school library during lunch to read anything she could get her hands on. Fantasy novels mostly. Stories about dragons and castles and heroes. She wore glasses with thick frames that were too big for her face, and she had a habit of pushing them up her nose every few minutes. Her teacher later described her as bright, curious, always asking questions. Then there was 10-year-old Lucas Brennan, a boy with a mop of dark curly hair and a laugh that could fill a room. Lucas was the class clown, always cracking jokes, always getting into harmless trouble. He once released a frog in the middle of a spelling test just to see what would happen. His father, a mechanic at the local auto shop, would shake his head and say Lucas was too clever for his own good. But everyone loved him. Even the teachers couldn't stay mad at him for long. 8-year-old Sophie Vega was the youngest. She was shy, almost painfully so, with long black hair that her mother braided every morning before school. Sophie loved animals. She had a dog named Biscuit, a golden retriever mix who followed her everywhere. She used to draw pictures of horses and cats and birds, covering her bedroom walls with crayon sketches. Her dream was to become a veterinarian someday. She told everyone who would listen. And finally, there was 10-year-old Ben Cartwright, a boy with freckles scattered across his nose like constellations. Ben was the son of a single mother who worked double shifts at the diner on Route 9. He was responsible beyond his years, often packing his own lunch, walking himself to school, checking in with his mom between her shifts. He was quiet, dependable, the kind of kid teachers described as mature for his age. These 5 children left their homes that Friday morning just like any other day. They met at the corner of Elm Street and Harper Road, a spot where they always gathered before walking the remaining 1.5 miles to Marlow Elementary. It was their routine. Their parents trusted them. But Marlow County was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors, where kids played outside until the streetlights came on, where everyone knew everyone. But on October 14th, 1983, those 5 kids never made it to school. The first sign something was wrong came at 9:15 a.m. when the school secretary, Helen Pruitt, noticed that all 5 children were marked absent. It wasn't unusual for 1 or 2 kids to miss school, but 5 from the same neighborhood. That raised a red flag. Helen called the Whitmore house first. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and unsuspecting. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Helen from the school. Just checking in, Danny and Emma didn't make it in today." There was a pause. Then confusion in Patricia's voice. "What? No, I sent them off at 7:30 this morning. Well, they left with the other kids like always." Helen's stomach tightened. She called the Brennan house next, then the Vega house, then the Cartwright house. Same story. Every parent insisted they had sent their children to school that morning. Every parent believed their kids were sitting in a classroom at that very moment. By 10 a.m., panic had set in. The Marlow County Sheriff's Department was small, just 6 deputies and Sheriff Tom Grayson, a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and a calm demeanor that inspired trust. Grayson had been sheriff for nearly 20 years, and in all that time the worst he'd dealt with were bar fights, petty thefts, and the occasional drunk driver. Missing children? That was something that happened in big cities, not in places like Marlow. But when the call came in that 5 kids had vanished between their homes and the school, Grayson felt a coldness settle into his chest. He mobilized every resource available. Deputies canvassed the route the children would have taken. Volunteers from the community joined search parties, combing through fields, checking abandoned buildings, calling out the children's names until their voices went hoarse. Dogs were brought in. Bloodhounds tracked the scent to the corner of Elm and Harper, where the kids always met, and then the trail just stopped, as if the children had simply ceased to exist. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. The investigation intensified as hours turned into days. The FBI was called in by the end of the first week. Agents swarmed the small town, interviewing neighbors, teachers, family members, anyone who might have seen or heard something. They set up a command center in the town hall. Phone lines were established for tips. Posters with the children's faces were plastered on every telephone pole, every storefront window, every bulletin board within a 100-mile radius. But there were no leads, no credible sightings, no ransom demands, just silence. Theories began to circulate. Some believed the children had run away, though that seemed unlikely given their ages and the fact that none of them had taken anything with them. Others suspected foul play, that someone had abducted them, though there was no evidence of a struggle, no witnesses, no suspicious vehicles reported in the area that morning. A few whispered about something darker, something supernatural, though most dismissed those ideas as the paranoid ramblings of a frightened community. And the parents were investigated thoroughly. It's standard procedure in cases involving missing children. Detectives looked into their finances, their relationships, their histories. They found nothing. No signs of abuse. No suspicious behavior. Just 5 families destroyed by grief and confusion, clinging to the hope that their children might still be alive somewhere. Weeks turned into months. The media coverage faded. The FBI agents packed up and left. The volunteers stopped showing up for search parties. Life, as it always does, moved on. But for the families of the Marlow Five, time stood still. Patricia Whitmore stopped trimming Danny's hair. She left his room exactly as it was the day he disappeared, baseball cards still in the shoebox, his bed still unmade. Emma's glasses sat on the nightstand, waiting for her to come home and put them on. Lucas Brennan's father kept his son's frog-catching net by the back door. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Sophie Vega's mother continued to braid an invisible strand of hair every morning, a ritual she couldn't break even though Sophie wasn't there. Ben Cartwright's mother worked even more shifts at the diner, as if staying busy would somehow make the pain more bearable. The years passed. 1984, 1985, 1990, 2000, and the case remained open, but it grew colder with each passing year. Sheriff Grayson retired in 1995, haunted by the case he could never solve. New sheriffs came and went. The files on the Marlow Five were transferred to storage, buried under decades of other cases, other tragedies. By 2024, most people in Marlow County had moved on. The older residents still remembered, of course. They remembered the fear, the search parties, the way the town had changed after that October morning. But the younger generation knew it only as a local legend, a ghost story parents told to keep their kids from wandering too far from home. The Marlow Five had become a footnote in Texas history, a cold case that would never be solved. Until April 2024. It started with a construction project. The county had approved the development of a new shopping center on the outskirts of town, on a plot of land that had been vacant for decades. The land had once belonged to a man named Virgil Haskell, a recluse who lived alone in a dilapidated farmhouse until his death in 1989. After Virgil died, the property fell into disrepair. The farmhouse collapsed in on itself, overtaken by weeds and decay. The land was eventually seized by the county for unpaid taxes and sat untouched for over 30 years. On April 9, 2024, construction crews began clearing the land. They tore down what remained of the old farmhouse, hauled away debris, and started excavating the foundation to prepare for new construction. That's when they found it. Buried 6 feet beneath where the farmhouse had stood, workers uncovered a concrete chamber. At first, they thought it was an old septic tank or a forgotten storm shelter. But as they dug further, they realized it was something else entirely. Something deliberate. Something hidden. The chamber was roughly 10 feet by 10 feet, reinforced with thick concrete walls. There was a single metal door, rusted shut, and a set of stairs leading down into darkness. When the workers pried open the door, the smell hit them first. Stale air. Rot. Something ancient and wrong. Inside the chamber, they found bones. Small bones. Children's bones. The police were called immediately. The site was cordoned off. Forensic teams descended on the location, and what they uncovered in the following weeks would send shockwaves through the entire state. 5 skeletons, 5 sets of remains, all belonging to children between the ages of 8 and 11. Buried alongside the bones were items that made identification possible. A baseball card, faded but still recognizable. A pair of glasses with thick frames. And a shoebox with a name written on it in marker. And a dog collar with the name Biscuit engraved on the tag. A school ID with a photo of a boy with freckles. Danny. Emma. Lucas. Sophie. Ben. The Marlow Five had been found. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had the children ended up in that chamber? Who put them there? And why had no one suspected Virgil Haskell, the man who owned the property, the man who lived alone on that isolated farmland for decades? The investigators began piecing together Virgil's life. But he had moved to Marlow County in 1979, 4 years before the disappearances. He kept to himself, rarely interacted with neighbors, worked odd jobs here and there, but mostly lived off the land. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no reason for anyone to suspect him of anything. But when forensic teams examined the chamber more closely, they found something that changed everything. Scratches, deep scratches carved into the concrete walls. Not random, deliberate. Words. Names. States. Then dates. Help us. Well, none. We are scared. October 14th, 1983. And the children had been alive down there. Trapped, terrified, clawing at the walls with their fingernails until their hands bled. And then there were the other markings, symbols, strange, intricate symbols etched into the floor of the chamber. Forensic experts couldn't identify them at first. They didn't match any known language or religious iconography. But when the images were shared with specialists, one anthropologist recognized them. They were old, very old, pre-Columbian. Symbols used in ancient rituals, rituals involving sacrifice. The theory that emerged from the evidence was as horrifying as it was bizarre. Virgil Haskell, the quiet recluse, had not been a random killer. He had been a believer, a practitioner of something dark, something ancient. The symbols suggested he had performed some kind of ritual on those children. But why? And what had he been trying to achieve? Detectives scoured Virgil's property for more evidence. They found journals, pages and pages of handwritten notes filled with ramblings about the old ways, about opening doors, about offerings to those who wait beyond. Virgil believed he was communicating with something that existed outside the boundaries of the known world, and he believed that the children were the key. But here's where it gets even stranger. When forensic pathologists examined the remains, they found something impossible. The bones showed signs of prolonged captivity, yes, malnutrition, dehydration, trauma, but they also showed something else, something that defied medical explanation. The bones had marks on them, burns, not from fire but from something else, something that left residue the lab couldn't identify. A substance that wasn't organic, wasn't chemical, wasn't anything found in nature. And the scratches on the walls, when analyzed under UV light, they glowed, not paint, not any known luminescent material, just glowed. Just glowed. The lead investigator, Detective Laura Finch, a woman who had worked cold cases for over 15 years, that stood in that chamber in May 2024 and felt something she had never felt before. Not fear exactly, but wrongness. A sense that this case was not just a tragedy. It was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. Virgil Haskell died in 1989. Heart attack. Or so the coroner's report said. But when investigators exhumed his body, they found something unexpected. His remains showed signs of the same burns as the children, and the same unidentifiable residue. Whatever Virgil had been trying to do, whatever ritual he had attempted, it had consumed him too. But the biggest question remained unanswered. If Virgil died in 1989, 6 years after the children disappeared, and the chamber had been sealed since then, how did the children end up dead down there? The forensic evidence suggested they had died within days of being taken, October 1983. But if that was true, then who had been caring for Virgil's property after his death? Who had made sure the chamber stayed hidden? Detective Finch began looking into Virgil's associates. He had lived alone, but surely someone had known him. Someone had visited. Someone had seen something. And that's when she found the name. A woman named Iris Malone. She had been Virgil's neighbor in 1983. She lived on a small farm about half a mile from his property. Iris was still alive in 2024, now 81 years old, living in a nursing home in Austin. When Detective Finch went to interview her, Iris smiled. "I was wondering when you'd come." Iris Malone had been waiting 41 years to tell her story. And what she revealed would make everyone wish they had never found that chamber. Detective Laura Finch sat across from Iris Malone in a small visiting room at the Sunridge Care Facility in Austin, Texas. The room smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. A single window overlooked a parking lot where the afternoon sun beat down on rows of cars. Iris sat in a wheelchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes sharp despite her age. She wore a pale blue cardigan and had her gray hair pulled back in a bun. She looked like someone's grandmother, Dixon, kind, harmless. But there was something in her smile that made Laura's skin crawl. "You said you were expecting me," Laura began, her voice steady, professional. "Why?" "Why?" Iris tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "Because I knew they'd find that chamber eventually. Land doesn't stay empty forever. Progress always comes, doesn't it? I'm surprised it took this long, honestly." Laura felt her jaw tighten. She had been a detective for 17 years. She had interviewed killers, rapists, monsters who wore human faces. But something about Iris Malone felt different. Felt wrong in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "Tell me about Virgil Haskell," Laura said, pulling out a small recording device and placing it on the table between them. "You were his neighbor in 1983. What was your relationship with him?" Iris's smile widened just a fraction. "Virgil was a believer. A true believer. Most people go through life blind, detective. They see the surface of things, the mundane, the ordinary. But Virgil, he saw deeper. He understood that there are layers to this world. Thin places where the walls between here and there grow weak." Laura kept her expression neutral, though every instinct told her this conversation was about to go somewhere dark. "What do you mean by there?" Iris leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "In the space between spaces. The place where things wait. Old things. Patient things. Things that existed long before humans built their cities and churches and shopping centers. She paused, her eyes fixed on Laura with an intensity that was unsettling. Virgil found a way to reach them, to communicate, to offer them what they wanted. Laura felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of the room. And what did they want? Innocence, Iris said simply. Pure, untouched innocence. Children, detective. That's what they have always wanted. That's what they have always taken. The recording device hummed quietly on the table. Laura forced herself to stay focused, to push past the revulsion rising in her throat. Are you confessing to involvement in the abduction and murder of the Marlow Five? Iris laughed. It was a soft, almost gentle sound that made the hairs on Laura's arms stand up. Murder? Oh no, detective, you still don't understand. Those children weren't murdered. They were given, offered, delivered to something far greater than you or I could ever comprehend. Laura wanted to reach across the table and shake this woman, to scream at her, to demand real answers instead of cryptic riddles. But she kept her composure. Walk me through October 14th, 1983. What happened that morning? Iris settled back in her wheelchair, her eyes distant, as if she were watching a memory play out before her. Virgil had been preparing for months. The chamber was built. The symbols were carved. Everything was ready. All we needed were the offerings. The 5 children. Specific children. It had to be 5. The number matters, you see. 5 points to a star. 5 paths to the center. How did you know which children? Laura asked. Virgil knew, Iris said. He had been watching them, studying them. They were pure, unmarked by the world, perfect vessels. She paused, her smile fading slightly. I helped him that morning. I drove my truck, an old Ford pickup, to the corner where the children gathered. Virgil was in the back, hidden under a tarp. When the kids saw me, they didn't run. Why would they? I was just a neighbor, and just a harmless old woman even then. Laura's stomach turned. What did you do? I told them there had been an accident, Iris said calmly. Told them a dog had been hit by a car down the road and needed help. Sophie, the little one with the dark hair, she started crying immediately. She loved animals, that one. The others followed because that's what children do. They trust, they believe, they want to help. The image formed in Laura's mind against her will. 5 children, innocent and unsuspecting, following Iris down a dirt road away from the safety of their routine, away from the school they would never reach. We led them to Virgil's property, Iris continued, to the farmhouse, told them the dog was in the barn. But when they went inside, Virgil was waiting. He had chloroform. Old-fashioned, but effective. They didn't suffer during the taking. That was important. The offerings had to be willing, or at least unaware. Laura's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. You drugged 5 children and locked them in an underground chamber. They clawed at the walls. They were terrified. Iris's expression didn't change. None. The ritual required time. 3 days and 3 nights. During that time, the children had to remain in the sacred space. The symbols had to do their work. The boundaries had to thin. Virgil performed the incantations, the offerings of blood, the prayers to those who wait, and on the 3rd night. October 17th, 1983, at exactly 3 a.m., something answered. The room felt colder. Laura noticed her breath was coming faster, her heart pounding in her chest. What answered? Ben. Iris's eyes gleamed. I don't have a name for it. I don't think it has a name in any language humans speak. But it came. I was there in the chamber when it happened. I saw the air itself bend and twist. I saw the symbols on the floor begin to glow, just like you found them all these years later. The children were awake by then, huddled together in the corner, crying for their mothers. And then the light came. Not like sunlight or firelight. Different. Wrong. It hurt to look at, but I couldn't look away. Laura's throat felt dry. What happened to the children? They walked into it, Iris whispered. One by one. Not because we forced them. They just stood up and walked toward the light, like they were being called, like they wanted to go. The oldest boy, Danny. He went first, then his sister, then the others. They didn't scream. They didn't fight. They just walked into that impossible light and disappeared. That's not possible, Laura said, though her voice lacked conviction. The forensic evidence shows they died in that chamber. Their bodies were found there. Iris's smile returned. Were they bodies, detective, or were they echoes, remnants? When the light faded, when whatever came took what it wanted, there were remains left behind. But they weren't the children anymore. Just empty shells. Husks. The part that mattered, the part that made them human. That was gone. Taken beyond. Laura stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. She needed air, needed to think. This was insane. It's impossible. But the evidence supported parts of Iris's story. The symbols, the glowing marks, the unidentifiable residue on the bones. None of it made sense through a rational lens. Why are you telling me this? Laura demanded. Why now, after 41 years? Iris looked up at her with something that might have been pity. Because it's happening again, detective. The cycle is returning. Virgil opened a door that night, and doors, once opened, don't stay closed forever. And they left something behind. Something that's been waiting, growing, feeding on the fear and grief of this town for decades. Laura felt ice in her veins. What are you talking about? Check the records, Iris said softly. Check missing persons reports in Marlow County from the last 5 years. Children. Always children. Always 5 at a time. It's subtle. Spread out. Different neighborhoods. Different circumstances. But the pattern is there if you know how to look for it. Laura's mind raced. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling slightly as she opened a secure database. She had access to state-wide records. She began searching. Marlow County. Missing persons. Minors. Last 10 years. The results made her blood run cold. 2019. 3 children reported missing over a 6-month period and never found. 2020. 2 more. Different parts of the county. There's no connection found between cases. That's 2021. 4 children. 1 found dead in a field. 3 never located. 2022. 1 child missing. 2023. 2 children. Both cases still open. The numbers didn't add up to 5 in any single year, but Iris was right. The pattern was there. 15 children in 5 years, 3 sets of 5 spread across time. How is this possible? Laura whispered. The door Virgil opened didn't close when he died, Iris said. It's still there, still hungry. And there are others now, others who have found it, others who know how to feed it. Laura looked at the old woman with a mixture of horror and rage. Who? Give me names. Iris shook her head slowly. I don't know them all. Virgil had notes. Journals. Did you find them? We did, Laura said. They were mostly incoherent ramblings. Look again, Iris advised. Look at the names written in the margins, the addresses, the dates. Virgil wasn't working alone. He was part of something larger, a network, but people who believe in the old ways, who serve those who wait beyond. They are still out there, detective, still offering children to the darkness. Laura felt the room spinning. This couldn't be real. This was the 21st century. That things like this didn't happen. But the evidence was there. The bodies, the symbols, the missing children, and the pattern. Why didn't you come forward? Laura asked, her voice breaking slightly. You could have stopped this. You could have saved those children. Iris's expression hardened. Stopped it. Detective, you can't stop what's eternal. What's older than your God, older than your laws. All you can do is survive it. I kept quiet because speaking would have changed nothing. Those children were always going to be taken. if not by Virgil, then by someone else. The hunger doesn't stop. It never stops. Laura wanted to arrest her right there, wanted to drag her out of that nursing home in handcuffs and make her face justice for what she had done, what she had helped do. But Iris was 81 years old. The statute of limitations on conspiracy was long expired, and without physical evidence directly tying her to the crime scene, any prosecution would be nearly impossible. But Laura could do one thing. She could find the others, and the network Virgil had been part of. She left the nursing home that day with a recording that would never be admissible in court but would guide the investigation forward. She returned to Marlow County and assembled a task force: detectives, FBI agents, specialists in cult activity and ritual crime. They went through Virgil's journals line by line, word by word, and they found them. Names, 12 names scattered throughout the pages. Some crossed out, some circled, some underlined multiple times, and the task force began tracking down each person. Some were dead, natural causes mostly, heart attacks, cancer, old age, but 5 were still alive, still in Texas. And when investigators looked into their backgrounds, patterns emerged. One lived near where 3 children had gone missing in 2019. Another owned property adjacent to where 2 children disappeared in 2020. A third had been questioned, then released, in a 2021 case involving a missing girl. The connections were circumstantial, weak in isolation. But together they formed a picture that was impossible to ignore. On June 3, 2024, coordinated raids were executed across 5 locations in Texas. Search warrants were served. Properties were searched, and what they found confirmed Laura's worst fears. Chambers, 5 different chambers, all hidden, all reinforced with concrete, all marked with the same symbols found at Virgil Haskell's property. 3 of the chambers were empty, prepared but unused. 2 contained remains, small bones, children's bones, and the investigation exploded into national news. The Marlow Five case became a starting point for something much larger. A multi-state task force was formed to investigate what the media began calling the Offering Network. Arrests were made. Trials began. But many questions remained unanswered. The suspects, when interrogated, all said variations of the same thing. They were believers. They were serving something greater. They were keeping the door open so that those who wait could feed. Psychiatric evaluations deemed them competent to stand trial. They weren't insane. They were simply devoted to something the modern world refused to acknowledge existed. Laura Finch worked the case for 18 months. She traveled to every site, interviewed every suspect, read every journal, every note, every scrap of evidence. And the more she learned, the less she understood. Because there were things the evidence showed that couldn't be explained. The glowing symbols that no lab could identify, and the residue that wasn't organic or chemical, and the way electromagnetic equipment malfunctioned near the chambers. But the strange patterns in radio static that one technician swore sounded like voices. Laura was a rational person, a scientist at heart, despite her badge. She believed in evidence, in facts, in things that could be measured and proven. But this case challenged everything she thought she knew about reality. On November 12, 2025, Laura returned to the original site. The chamber beneath Virgil Haskell's former property had been excavated completely, studied, photographed. The shopping center construction had been permanently halted. The land was deemed too unstable, though Laura suspected the real reason was that no one wanted to build anything there. The county had seized the property again, and it sat empty, fenced off, forgotten. Laura stood at the edge of the excavation pit in the fading afternoon light. The chamber was still visible below, now exposed to the sky. The symbols were still there, carved into concrete. They didn't glow anymore. But sometimes, when the light hit them just right, Laura thought she could see something. A flicker, a suggestion of movement. She thought about the Marlow Five, about Danny and Emma and Lucas and Sophie and Ben, about the lives they should have lived. the families they destroyed by vanishing, the decades of grief and unanswered questions. When she thought about Iris Malone's words, the hunger doesn't stop. It never stops. 15 children found so far. But how many others had there been over the years? Over the decades? Over the centuries? If this network was real, if these beliefs went back as far as the symbols suggested, how many children had walked into that impossible light and disappeared? Laura didn't have an answer. She wasn't sure anyone did. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A text from another detective on the task force. They had found something. Another property. Another chamber. This one in Oklahoma. And there were signs it had been used recently, and within the last month. Laura closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The work wasn't over. It would never be over. Because Iris had been right about one thing. You couldn't stop what was eternal. All you could do was fight it. Push back against the darkness. Save who you could save. She got in her car and started driving north toward Oklahoma, toward another crime scene. Another horror, another group of families whose lives would never be the same. But as she drove through the Texas twilight, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. That somewhere in some space between spaces, something was waiting. Patient, hungry, ancient, unlimited. And the door Virgil Haskell opened in 1983 was still open, still calling, still waiting for the next offering. The Marlow Five had been found. Their remains returned to their families. Funerals were held, graves were filled, but the mystery of what really happened to them, where they went in those final moments before their bodies became empty shells, remained unsolved. Some questions don't have answers. Some horrors can't be explained by science or logic. Sometimes the only thing you can do is acknowledge that there are things in this world, old things, dark things, that exist beyond human understanding. And sometimes those things take children. The case files remain open. The investigation continues. But Danny Whitmore, Emma Whitmore, Lucas Brennan, Sophie Vega, and Ben Cartwright are not coming home. They walked into something on October 17, 1983, something that took them beyond the reach of this world. Their names are carved on a memorial stone now, placed in the center of Marlow County. Families visit, leave flowers, say prayers, remember, But late at night, when the town is quiet and the streets are empty, some residents claim they can hear children laughing. Faint, distant, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. And in the fields outside town, where Virgil Haskell's property once stood, the grass doesn't grow quite right. Animals avoid the area. Birds don't sing there. Land remembers what happened. The earth remembers what was taken. And somewhere, in the thin places where the walls grow weak, something ancient waits. Patient. Hungry. Always hungry. For innocence. For offerings. For the next 5 children who will walk into the light and never come home. The Marlow Five vanished on an October morning in 1983. Their bodies were found 41 years later. But their souls, their essence, the part that made them who they were, that's still out there, somewhere, beyond the door, and the door is still open.